while they're being formed. A lot of people imagine that the big turning points in life show up like a thunderstorm. They picture some huge mistake, a sudden collapse, or a dramatic moment where everything falls apart in a way that's impossible to ignore. When people think about failure, they often imagine a situation so obvious that anyone would see it coming. They assume that if something truly dangerous were happening in their life, it would show up with enough warning and noise that they would immediately recognize it. But life usually doesn't work that way. The biggest losses people experience rarely arrive with a loud crash. More often they show up quietly, almost in a polite way, through small choices that seem harmless when they're made. Someone puts off learning something useful. They delay dealing with a problem that feels uncomfortable. They choose the easier option instead of the more disciplined one. And the moment passes without much thought. This is where the real danger starts to appear. Each of those moments feels too small to matter very much. If someone puts off something difficult today, it doesn't look like a decision that will change their life. If they delay improving a skill for a month, the consequences seem almost invisible. The mind quickly tells itself that nothing important has really happened. And because the moment looks unimportant, it moves on without much reflection. The truth is that life is rarely shaped by the occasional dramatic decision that stands out. Instead, it is shaped by the repeated decisions that quietly stack up over time. One postponed effort may seem trivial by itself, but when the same delay happens again next week and then again the week after, a pattern begins to form. What once looked like a single moment slowly turns into a habit. And habits have a powerful way of setting direction. Most people don't notice when that direction starts to shift. There is no alarm clock ringing to tell someone that time is slipping away. There is no visible sign that a person has started repeating a pattern that could quietly cost them years. The days still look familiar. The routine still feels comfortable. On the surface, life appears almost exactly the same as it did before. The problem is that patterns rarely announce themselves while they're being formed. A harmful pattern doesn't arrive with a warning label that says, "This choice will quietly redirect the next decade of your life." Instead, it blends into normal behavior so smoothly that the person repeating it feels completely ordinary. They believe they're simply getting through the day, making practical decisions, and moving forward just like everyone else. As time passes, those everyday decisions begin to add up. A person postpones one improvement that would require effort. They delay one responsibility that demands discipline. They avoid one opportunity that feels uncertain or uncomfortable. None of those choices look dramatic on their own, yet together, they slowly start shaping the direction of that person's life. What's interesting about patterns is that they grow quietly. When someone repeats the same behavior long enough, the mind stops questioning it. Something that once required a conscious decision eventually becomes automatic. The person begins moving through their routine almost on autopilot, repeating the same responses day after day, because those responses have become familiar. This is why the most dangerous patterns in life are usually the ones people don't notice while they're happening. People expect danger to look dramatic, but real danger often looks very ordinary. It shows up in small delays, quiet avoidance, and comfortable routines that never quite push someone to grow. Because those actions don't look harmful in the moment, they can continue for years without being questioned. Think about someone who decides to postpone learning a valuable skill. They might tell themselves they'll start next month when things calm down a little. When next month finally arrives, something else suddenly feels more urgent. Each delay sounds reasonable at the time, and because every postponement seems small, it never feels like a serious issue. But months quietly turn into years. The skill that could have been developed through steady effort never gets built. Opportunities that required that ability quietly go to someone else. The person often doesn't notice the moment those opportunities disappear, because the loss happens gradually instead of all at once. Time has a way of revealing patterns long after they have already influenced the outcome. Someone might look back after 10 years and wonder why certain doors never opened for them. They may feel confused about why progress seemed slower than expected. What they often realize is that the answer was hidden in small decisions, repeated again and again. Those decisions didn't look dangerous when they were made. Each moment seemed reasonable at the time. Each delay felt temporary and easy to justify. Yet when those choices were repeated often enough, they quietly created a pattern that shaped the direction of the years that followed. There's something interesting about how people behave once a pattern becomes familiar. After a while, that pattern starts to feel normal. Most people rarely question the habits that have become part of their daily routine. If someone has spent years postponing improvement, avoiding the difficult things, or delaying important action, those behaviors eventually start to feel natural. The person may not even realize they're repeating the same pattern again and again. The mind is very good at justifying familiar behavior. When someone postpones something important, they can quickly come up with a reason that sounds logical. They might believe the timing isn't quite right yet, or they may convince themselves that things will be easier later. Each explanation feels sensible in the moment, which allows the pattern to continue without much resistance. Eventually, the pattern becomes almost invisible. The person believes they are simply responding to circumstances as they come up. But the same reaction keeps appearing again and again. It becomes part of their routine, part of their thinking, and eventually, part of the results they experience in life. The reason this kind of pattern becomes so costly is that time doesn't stop while someone is repeating it. Every postponed effort quietly spends a little more time. Every delayed improvement increases the distance between where a person is and where they could have been. Because these changes happen slowly, they rarely attract immediate attention. Years can slip by surprisingly fast when patterns go unexamined. Someone may wake up one day shocked by how quickly time has moved, wondering why certain goals were never completed. In many cases, the answer isn't some dramatic failure, but a quiet pattern that repeated itself long enough to shape the final result. Life tends to respond to the actions that are repeated most often. The direction of a person's future is rarely determined by occasional intentions or brief bursts of motivation. It is usually determined by consistent behavior over time. When someone repeats the same comfortable responses for years, those responses eventually define the limits of what their life becomes. This is why one of the most valuable skills a person can develop is the ability to recognize patterns early. The moment someone becomes aware that a pattern is forming in their behavior, they gain the opportunity to interrupt it. Awareness brings attention to something that previously blended into routine, and once it becomes visible, it can be examined and changed. For many people, the real tragedy isn't a lack of intelligence or opportunity. The real tragedy is that they never notice the small pattern quietly shaping their time. They assume the years are simply passing on their own, when in reality, those years are being shaped by repeated decisions that looked insignificant when they first appeared. A pattern that ends up costing someone years rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. Most of the time it feels ordinary. It feels reasonable. It feels like the natural flow of everyday life. Yet beneath that normal appearance is a quiet force that slowly determines the direction of a person's future. Once someone understands this idea, they begin to look at their daily decisions differently. They start paying attention to the small moments that used to pass without notice. They realize that the direction of a life is almost never decided in one dramatic moment. Instead, it is decided by the quiet repetition of choices that seem harmless while they are gradually shaping the years ahead. And one of the most common choices that quietly shapes those years is the choice of comfort. Comfort has a strange way of showing up in a person's life. It almost never presents itself as something dangerous or harmful. Most of the time, it appears in the form of relief. Someone works hard for a while, solves a few problems, and eventually reaches a point where things start to feel manageable again. The days become predictable, the routine feels familiar, and the pressure to push themselves begins to fade. In the beginning, that comfort often feels deserved. There's nothing wrong with enjoying some stability after putting in effort. A farmer rests after planting his fields. A craftsman takes a break after finishing a long project. Rest itself isn't the issue. The real problem begins when comfort slowly changes from a short pause into a permanent preference. You see, comfort usually doesn't force people to move backward. Instead, it gently encourages them to stay exactly where they already are. That encouragement is subtle and almost impossible to notice at first. A person may start repeating the same habits, the same routines, and the same ways of thinking, simply because those patterns no longer require much effort to maintain. The mind naturally leans toward what feels familiar. Familiar surroundings create a sense of safety, and that sense of safety can easily be mistaken for progress. A person might start believing they're doing well, simply because nothing in their life feels difficult anymore. But real growth rarely takes place inside the boundaries of complete comfort. Think about the way people develop new skills. Whenever someone starts learning something unfamiliar, there's always a stage where things feel awkward. The beginner struggles with the basics, makes plenty of mistakes, and moves forward slowly. That early stage feels uncomfortable because the person is operating outside their current level of ability. However, if someone begins prioritizing comfort above everything else, they quietly start avoiding those difficult stages. They may remain at the same level of ability because pushing beyond it requires effort and patience. The familiar routine feels easier, so the routine continues exactly as it is. At first, there doesn't seem to be any clear consequence for this choice. The person still gets up every day, follows their normal schedule, and moves through life as usual. Since nothing dramatic happens, staying comfortable seems perfectly reasonable. But over time, the cost slowly begins to show itself. While one person stays within the safety of their familiar habits, someone else is pushing themselves to grow. Another person is learning new skills, exploring unfamiliar challenges, and becoming more capable year after year. The gap between those two paths might look small at the beginning, but the distance quietly grows wider as time passes. Comfort has a way of hiding limitations. A person might live inside the same boundaries for years, without realizing those boundaries have slowly turned into a cage. Nothing around them forces them to question their habits. The routine still works well enough, and because it works, it feels acceptable. This is the moment when comfort turns into a trap. Not because comfort itself is bad, but because it can slowly convince someone that their current situation is good enough to remain exactly the same. When that belief settles in, curiosity begins to fade. Ambition starts to soften. The drive to improve becomes weaker because nothing in the present situation seems to demand change. The trap is difficult to notice because it doesn't feel restrictive while it's forming. A person may feel relaxed rather than confined. They may believe they're simply enjoying stability in their life. Yet while they remain in that familiar space, their growth quietly begins to slow down. Human potential only expands when it is challenged. Muscles grow stronger when they are pushed past their previous limits. Skills improve when they are practiced under greater difficulty. Even a person's character develops through moments that require courage, discipline, and persistence. When comfort becomes the top priority, those challenging moments are often avoided. The mind starts choosing the path that requires the least resistance. Tasks that seem demanding get pushed to another day. Opportunities that involve uncertainty are declined. Gradually, the person becomes used to operating within a very narrow range of effort. What makes this pattern strange is that it can continue for years without drawing much attention. Life may look stable from the outside. Bills are paid, routines continue, and responsibilities are handled well enough to keep everything in order. Since nothing falls apart, the person may assume that everything is fine. But stability is not the same as progress. A ship sitting safely in a harbor is protected from storms, but it will never reach another shore. Safety can preserve the present moment, yet it cannot create growth if the ship never leaves the harbor. Comfort gently persuades people to stay anchored. It tells them that tomorrow might be a better time to take a risk. It suggests that stretching themselves can wait until circumstances improve. Each of these thoughts sounds reasonable in the moment, but they quietly delay the very actions that create progress. Years later, a person may look around and realize that very little in their life has actually changed. The same abilities remain, the same routines continue, and the same boundaries still shape what they can do. At that point, they may start wondering why their life feels smaller than they once imagined it would be. In many cases, the answer is not some dramatic mistake or obvious failure. The answer is the quiet influence of comfort that slowly turned into a trap. By choosing what felt familiar day after day, the person unintentionally limited their own growth. Comfort becomes especially dangerous when it convinces someone that improvement is no longer necessary. Once that belief settles in, growth starts to feel optional instead of essential. The person stops seeking new challenges because they no longer feel the need to evolve. But life continues to move forward whether a person grows or not. Industries change, opportunities shift, and circumstances evolve. When someone stays in the same place for too long, they eventually realize that the world around them has moved ahead. The irony is that comfort once felt like protection. It felt like the safest place to stay. Yet over time, refusing to step outside that comfort slowly reduces a person's ability to adapt, learn, and compete with changing situations. Real growth always includes a certain amount of friction. There will be effort, uncertainty, and even the occasional failure along the way. Those experiences are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that a person is stretching their abilities and expanding what they are capable of doing. Once someone understands this idea, they begin to view comfort differently. Instead of chasing it constantly, they learn to balance it with challenge. They allow themselves to rest when needed, but they do not allow rest to turn into long-term stagnation. A life built entirely around comfort slowly becomes smaller. The person stops stretching, stops experimenting, and stops discovering what they might actually be capable of accomplishing. Meanwhile, time keeps moving forward, quietly recording the cost of staying where things felt safe. Comfort may feel good in the moment, but when it becomes the main pattern in someone's life, it slowly turns into a quiet trap. It convinces them to stay exactly where they are, even when their potential is asking them to move beyond the boundaries that once felt so secure. And one of the habits that quietly supports that kind of comfort shows up in a lot of people's lives. And at first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. It doesn't look like laziness. And it rarely feels like someone is outright refusing to do something. Instead, it usually appears as a simple sentence people repeat to themselves over and over again. The sentence is short, reasonable, and very convincing. It usually sounds something like this: I'll deal with that later. Most people don't intentionally resist progress. They don't wake up in the morning and decide that they're going to avoid improving their life. In fact, many people genuinely want to grow, learn new things, and move forward. The real issue usually isn't a lack of desire. The real issue is the habit of postponing things, which slowly interferes with that desire without the person fully noticing it. Postponing something feels very different from refusing to do it. When someone refuses to do something, the decision is final and clear. The mind understands that the opportunity has been rejected, and there's no confusion about what happened. But postponement creates the feeling that the action will still happen someday, which makes the delay seem harmless. When a person tells themselves they'll handle something later, they still feel like progress is part of the plan. They believe they haven't given up on the goal. In their mind, they're just waiting for a better time to begin. The problem is that this better time almost never shows up on its own. Life has a way of constantly filling itself with new demands and distractions. Someone who postpones the important stuff today will almost certainly run into new responsibilities tomorrow. Obligations start piling up, unexpected problems show up, and the mind begins to believe that the current moment still isn't the right time to take action. Each delay becomes easier the more often it happens. The first time someone postpones something important, they may feel a small amount of discomfort. They might remember that they intended to act sooner, and they may briefly question whether waiting was the right decision. But if the same delay happens again the following week, that uncomfortable feeling begins to fade. The mind slowly adapts to the pattern. Eventually, postponing things turns into a habit. Instead of dealing with challenges right away, the person automatically pushes them into the future. The phrase, "I'll deal with that later," becomes a normal part of their thinking. Because the delay feels temporary, it rarely seems like a serious mistake. But time responds to action, not intention. The calendar keeps moving forward no matter what someone plans to accomplish someday. Every postponed decision quietly increases the distance between the present moment and the progress that could have been made. Imagine someone who wants to improve their knowledge in a certain subject. They might buy a book, sign up for a course, or make a plan to study on a regular schedule. But when the moment arrives to actually begin, something else suddenly feels more urgent. The study session gets pushed to the next day, then to the following week, and eventually the book ends up collecting dust while the intention remains untouched. What makes this pattern so deceptive is that the person never completely gives up on the goal. They keep telling themselves they'll start soon. Because the plan still exists in their mind, it feels like progress is only temporarily paused. Meanwhile, the weeks quietly pass, while nothing actually happens. The habit of delay has a remarkable ability to stretch time without a person fully noticing it. One postponed action may only cost a day or two. But when that same delay happens again and again, the lost time begins to add up. Something that could have been completed in a month might stay unfinished for years, simply because it was never started when the opportunity first appeared. This habit doesn't just affect each thing you do. Over time, it starts influencing how a person approaches responsibility itself. Someone who frequently postpones improvement begins to treat time as if it can always be borrowed from the future. They assume there will always be another chance to begin, another season to prepare, another opportunity to fix what was neglected. Unfortunately, time doesn't work that way. Every season that passes removes one opportunity and replaces it with a different set of circumstances. Someone who delays learning a skill today may find that tomorrow suddenly requires the very ability they chose not to develop earlier. You can see this pattern in many everyday situations. A person postpones improving their health because they feel too busy. They delay organizing their finances because it seems complicated or overwhelming. They postpone important conversations in their relationships because the discussion might be uncomfortable. Each one of those delays seems understandable when looked at by itself. Life often throws situations at us that demand immediate attention, and it's natural to focus on what feels urgent. But when the same postponements keep happening over and over again, the habit quietly begins shaping the future. The person who postpones improvement today usually postpones it tomorrow as well. The mind becomes used to the delay, and eventually the person stops questioning it altogether. Starting immediately begins to feel unusual, while postponing things starts to feel normal. After a while, the consequences begin to show up. Health that could have gradually improved becomes weaker instead. Financial stability that could have been built slowly never quite develops. Opportunities that required preparation quietly pass by because the preparation was always scheduled for later. The tragedy of postponement is that it rarely looks dramatic enough to raise alarm. If someone lost an entire year because of an obvious failure, the situation would be impossible to ignore. But when that same year disappears through hundreds of small delays spread across many days, the loss becomes much harder to recognize. That is why the habit of delay slowly grows over time. A person believes they are only postponing one small thing, but that small delay becomes part of a larger pattern. Each repetition strengthens the habit, and the habit gradually shapes how the person responds to every new opportunity that appears. Someone who takes action right away begins to build momentum. They develop the habit of addressing challenges while their intention is still fresh. Their progress may not look dramatic in the beginning, but steady action slowly moves them forward. The person who constantly postpones action experiences the opposite. Their intentions may still be strong, but the gap between intention and execution keeps growing wider. Eventually, that gap becomes so large that the person starts doubting their own discipline and ability. But the real issue was never a lack of ability. The real issue was the quiet habit of postponement that expanded little by little over time. What started as a simple delay slowly turned into a pattern that consumed months and eventually years. Recognizing this pattern is one of the most valuable insights a person can gain. The moment someone notices the habit of delay in their own behavior, they begin seeing how often the mind suggests waiting instead of acting. Once that awareness appears, the person has the opportunity to respond differently. Instead of pushing responsibility into the future, they can deal with it in the present. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, they can start working with the circumstances that already exist. Time rewards action taken today far more than plans saved for tomorrow. The difference between real progress and quiet stagnation often comes down to one decision: whether someone chooses to act while the opportunity is right in front of them, or whether they postpone the effort for a later moment that may never truly arrive. And once a person begins to understand this, they also begin to notice one of the strongest forces shaping a person's life. It isn't luck, and it isn't some mysterious advantage that only a few people receive. The thing that quietly influences so many outcomes is repetition. What someone does once may not matter very much, but what they do again and again eventually becomes the direction their life takes. People tend to underestimate how much small choices add up over time. A single action can feel almost meaningless when it stands by itself. Reading a few pages of a book might not seem like a big accomplishment. Skipping that reading session might not feel like a big loss either. But when those same decisions happen day after day, their impact begins to grow. Life is always compounding something in the background. Every repeated action quietly builds on the one that came before it. A person might not notice the results right away because compounding usually works slowly at first. In the early stages, the changes look small, sometimes so small they're almost invisible. But when repetition continues long enough, the results begin to grow much faster. Think about it. Reading 10 pages in a day doesn't seem like a huge effort. It might take less than 30 minutes, and it can feel like very minor progress. Yet when someone keeps doing that every day, something interesting starts to happen. 10 pages become 70 pages in a week, hundreds of pages in a month, and several books over the course of a year. Now imagine that habit continuing for 10 years. The person who reads a little bit every day will end up accumulating a tremendous amount of knowledge without ever feeling overwhelmed by the process. The progress didn't come from a dramatic burst of effort. It came from a small action repeated consistently over time. The same principle also works in the opposite direction. Someone who avoids learning anything new for years might not feel the cost right away. Their daily routine continues, their responsibilities still get handled, and nothing suddenly falls apart overnight. Yet the absence of growth quietly compounds just as much as steady improvement does. As time goes on, the person who avoids learning slowly falls behind the people who are improving little by little. The difference may not be obvious in the first year or two, but as the years keep passing, the gap becomes harder and harder to ignore. The person who invested small amounts of effort each day eventually develops a depth of knowledge that the other person never gained. This is how compounding works. It turns repeated behavior into long-term results. Small improvements gradually build into major progress, while small neglects gradually turn into serious limitations. What starts as a tiny difference eventually grows into a large separation. Many people misunderstand this process because they expect results to appear quickly. When someone starts a positive habit, the early stages often don't look impressive. A person might read regularly, practice a skill, or spend time improving themselves. Yet the visible rewards seem very small at first. Because progress appears slow in the beginning, some people lose motivation and stop the effort entirely. They don't realize that compounding requires patience, just as a seed spends time growing roots beneath the soil before anything appears above the ground. Repeated effort needs time before the results begin to show. Someone who understands compounding approaches things differently. They aren't discouraged by slow beginnings because they know the direction of their actions matters more than immediate results. Every small effort becomes another layer added to the foundation of their future. Instead of chasing recognition right away, they focus on the steady accumulation of improvement. This way of thinking changes how a person views everyday choices. Instead of asking whether a single action matters very much, they start asking what would happen if that action were repeated for years. The answer to that question reveals the true power behind decisions that once seemed small. One day of neglect may not cause any noticeable damage, but if neglect becomes a daily habit, the accumulated cost can become extremely large. Skills that could have been developed remain weak. Opportunities that required preparation never appear within reach. The person may wonder why certain possibilities never came along, without realizing that the foundation for those opportunities was never built. Patterns become powerful through repetition. A positive habit repeated hundreds of times slowly turns into a strength. A negative habit repeated just as often slowly becomes a limitation. The repetition itself is what gives the pattern its force. This is why life rarely changes because of occasional bursts of effort. A person might feel motivated for a short time and work extremely hard for a few days. That energy can create some progress, but it rarely produces lasting change unless the effort continues consistently. Consistency is what activates the compounding effect. When someone repeats constructive behavior regularly, the results slowly begin reinforcing themselves. Skills become easier to use, knowledge becomes easier to apply, and confidence grows as the person begins seeing evidence of their improvement. The opposite pattern produces very different results. Inconsistent effort prevents the compounding process from building momentum. Someone who improves only once in a while never allows their habits to strengthen. Every time they stop and then start again, the process resets back to the early stages. One remarkable thing about compounding is that it doesn't care whether the repeated behavior is helpful or harmful. The process simply magnifies whatever someone does most often. If a person consistently works on improving themselves, compounding multiplies that growth. If someone consistently avoids improvement, the same process multiplies stagnation. This means that each day a person is quietly contributing to the direction their future will take. Every repeated choice becomes another piece added to the pattern shaping the years ahead. The person may not see the results right away, but the accumulation continues steadily in the background. Think of a long journey made one step at a time. A single step might look insignificant, but thousands of steps eventually carry someone across great distances. The direction of those steps determines where the traveler ends up. Human lives work in much the same way. Every small decision becomes another step along a path that stretches into the future. If those steps move toward improvement, the path leads toward growth and expansion. If those steps avoid growth, the path slowly becomes narrower. When someone understands the compounding nature of repeated choices, they gain a powerful advantage. Instead of constantly searching for dramatic breakthroughs, they begin paying close attention to the habits that appear every day. They realize that quiet actions repeated consistently will eventually produce results far greater than occasional bursts of enthusiasm. This understanding changes the way a person approaches daily behavior. Small constructive actions start to feel more valuable because they contribute to something larger over time. Neglect begins to look more concerning because it reveals a pattern that could slowly shape the years ahead. Life is always building something through repetition. Whether that structure becomes strong or fragile depends on the choices a person repeats most often. The future is rarely decided by one dramatic moment. More often, it is determined by the compounding effect of small decisions that quietly guide a person's direction over many years. And once a person recognizes how powerful repetition really is, the truth begins to appear in everything we've been talking about. And it's something a lot of people overlook. The same force that allows a pattern to quietly steal years from someone's life is the very same force that allows a person to take those years back. If repeated behavior can slowly push a life in an unproductive direction, then repeated behavior can just as easily guide it back toward progress. Patterns are not permanent structures that are carved into stone. They only exist because certain actions are repeated often enough that they eventually become routine. When those actions begin to change, the pattern that depended on them begins to weaken. It may not disappear immediately, but it cannot keep going forever if the behavior that created it stops being repeated. Understanding this gives a person a surprising amount of control over their future. Many people believe they are trapped by the patterns that shape their past. They look at their habits and assume those habits are permanent parts of who they are. But habits are not permanent. They are simply behaviors that have been practiced often enough that they begin to feel automatic. Once someone understands that idea, change starts to look much less mysterious. The process doesn't require a dramatic transformation or some sudden burst of incredible effort. In most situations, change begins in a much simpler way. It begins when a person decides to interrupt a familiar pattern at the moment it shows up. Think about someone who has spent years putting off the difficult things. The habit of delay might feel almost automatic at this point. Whenever responsibility appears, the mind quickly suggests dealing with it later. That response may have been repeated so many times that it now feels completely natural. But the moment that person becomes aware of the pattern, something important changes. Awareness creates a pause between the impulse and the action. Instead of automatically postponing something like before, the person suddenly has the opportunity to respond in a different way. That pause might only last a few seconds, but those few seconds contain the possibility for real change. If the person chooses to act immediately instead of postponing, they have just interrupted the pattern that used to guide their behavior. In the beginning, interrupting that pattern might feel uncomfortable. The mind has become used to the familiar routine, and any change to that routine can feel strange at first. Acting right away may require discipline, and the effort might feel harder than simply repeating the old habit. But repetition works in both directions. The more often a person practices a new behavior, the more familiar that behavior becomes. Just as a negative pattern was built through repetition, a positive pattern can be built through the exact same process. The first few interruptions may require deliberate effort. A person has to consciously choose to act differently because the old pattern still has momentum. However, each time the new response is repeated, it becomes a little easier. The mind slowly adapts to the new routine, and over time, the constructive response starts to feel natural. This is usually how real change takes place. It rarely happens through a single dramatic moment that instantly transforms everything. Instead, it develops through steady decisions that slowly replace the old pattern with a new one. Someone who begins acting immediately instead of delaying responsibilities may notice small improvements at first. Tasks start getting finished sooner. Opportunities are handled while they are still available. The sense of progress slowly replaces the frustration that once came from constant postponement. As time passes, those small improvements begin to add up. Responsibilities that once lingered for weeks get handled quickly. Confidence starts to grow because the person sees the results of consistent action. What started as one small interruption gradually turns into a new pattern that guides everyday behavior. This same principle applies to many different areas of life. Someone who has avoided learning for years can start by reading a few pages each day. At first, those pages may not seem very significant, but they represent the beginning of a different pattern. With enough repetition, the habit of learning quietly replaces the habit of neglect. Another person might decide to improve their discipline when handling responsibilities. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, they begin dealing with important matters as soon as they appear. Each completed task strengthens the new habit of responsibility. And over time, the person becomes known as someone who follows through. What makes these changes interesting is that they usually begin with very small actions. One disciplined decision may not transform a life overnight, but it changes the direction of the pattern. Once the direction changes, repetition begins, carrying the person toward a different future. Many people wait until they feel extremely motivated before trying to change their habits. They assume that transformation requires a powerful emotional surge that pushes them into action. Motivation can certainly help, but it is rarely the thing that determines long-term results. What truly changes a life is the willingness to act consistently, even when motivation is average or even low. The person who builds lasting progress does not depend on intense feelings. Instead, they rely on simple discipline, repeated day after day. Each time the new behavior appears, the old pattern weakens a little more. The habit that once controlled the routine slowly loses its strength because it is no longer being reinforced. At the same time, the constructive behavior grows stronger through repetition. Eventually, the new pattern begins to feel just as natural as the old one once did. The person who used to postpone improvement now takes action quickly. The person who once avoided responsibility now handles it with confidence. From the outside, the change might look dramatic, but it was actually built through a long series of small decisions. One of the most encouraging things about this process is that it can begin at any moment. A person does not need to wait for a special season, a new year, or the perfect opportunity. The decision to interrupt a pattern can start today with the very next responsibility that appears. Time will keep moving forward no matter what someone decides to do. Another year will arrive just as surely as the last one did. The real question is whether that year will be guided by the same pattern that quietly consumed the previous ones, or whether a new pattern will start shaping the future instead. The difference between those two outcomes often begins with one simple decision made during an ordinary moment. When someone recognizes the pattern that has been repeating and chooses to respond differently, they begin redirecting the course of their life. The pattern that once stole years slowly loses its influence, replaced by new habits that gradually build a stronger and more intentional future. In many situations, the reason harm never occurs is simply because the person never had the ability to cause it. Someone who lacks physical strength isn't likely to start a fight, but that doesn't automatically mean they possess the wisdom to avoid one. Someone who lacks influence can't easily manipulate others, but that doesn't necessarily mean they chose honesty. When the ability isn't there in the first place, restraint isn't really a decision. It's just the reality of the situation. And when people confuse limitation with virtue, they start misunderstanding what character actually is. Over time, that confusion begins shaping how they see themselves. This misunderstanding creates a quiet illusion that many people carry with them for years. They see themselves as peaceful people, when in truth they may have simply never developed the ability to be anything else. Their lives never demanded real restraint because they never possessed meaningful power, leverage, or capability. Without realizing it, they end up interpreting weakness as proof of moral success. It's very easy to feel comfortable living inside that illusion. A person can look at their calm, uneventful life and conclude they must be a good person because nothing dramatic has ever happened. They haven't caused conflict, they haven't shaken systems, and they haven't intimidated anyone with their presence. But the real question isn't just whether harm has happened. The deeper question is whether the person ever had the ability to cause it in the first place. If someone doesn't have the strength to break something, the fact that nothing is broken doesn't automatically prove wisdom. If someone doesn't have the voice or influence to sway others, their silence might not be restraint at all. Many people mistake their small reach for moral discipline, when in reality it's simply a reflection of undeveloped ability. The difference between those two things is significant, yet most people never stop long enough to notice it. That distinction becomes clearer once ability enters the picture. Real virtue only starts to show itself once ability enters the picture. The moment someone becomes capable of causing harm, their choices begin to carry real meaning. Before that point, much of their behavior is shaped by circumstance rather than character. They don't avoid wrongdoing because they've mastered themselves. They avoid it because they lack the tools to act differently. That realization can be uncomfortable. It asks people to rethink the story they've been telling themselves about who they are. For years, they may have believed they were calm, patient, and restrained. But when they take an honest look at their lives, they might realize those qualities were never truly tested. Without temptation, influence, or strength, restraint was never required. Think about the difference between someone who can't raise their voice and someone who chooses not to. One person is limited by weakness, while the other is guided by control. On the surface, the behavior might look exactly the same, but internally, the reality is completely different. One situation represents helplessness, while the other represents mastery. Most people never explore that difference because it forces them to face an uncomfortable truth. They start to see that their harmlessness may not come from noble character at all. Instead, it might simply be the result of limited ability, undeveloped discipline, and potential that was never built. Few people enjoy confronting that realization, but it's one of the most important insights a person can have. Once it becomes visible, the direction of improvement begins to change. Once that truth becomes visible, the focus begins to change. Instead of asking how to remain harmless, the question becomes how to become capable. Attention shifts towards strengthening the mind, improving communication, sharpening skills, and building discipline. Each of these things increases a person's ability to influence the world around them. At first, that idea can feel unsettling because greater capability also means greater potential for harm. The stronger someone becomes, the more damage they could theoretically cause if they lost control. It's exactly why many people quietly avoid developing their abilities. Remaining harmless feels safer because it avoids the responsibility that strength eventually brings. But a life built around harmlessness is also a life built around limitation. It means a person never develops the strength to defend what matters to them. They never gain the influence to improve their surroundings. They never acquire the ability to shape outcomes in meaningful ways. Their life stays quiet, not because they deliberately chose peace, but because they never developed the power to create change. The reality is that genuine goodness requires the presence of strength. Kindness means far more when the person has the ability to act differently. Patience carries more weight when it belongs to someone capable of decisive action. Restraint only becomes meaningful when it limits a real capacity for harm. Without strength, what looks like virtue can sometimes just be powerlessness. Without capability, true moral choices rarely appear. A person who cannot create disruption might appear peaceful, but that peace has never actually been tested by real influence or authority. This is where the first stage of the journey begins. The gap between you and being dangerous doesn't start with aggression or hostility. It begins with the slow and deliberate development of capability. The stronger your abilities become, the more meaningful your choices eventually become as well. Capability turns harmlessness into potential. Once someone gains strength, discipline, and competence, their actions start to carry weight. Their words begin influencing people. Their decisions begin shaping outcomes. Their presence starts affecting environments in ways that were never possible before. That shift introduces a new level of responsibility, but it also introduces a deeper level of character. A capable person who chooses restraint demonstrates something far more powerful than simple harmlessness. They show self-control, judgment, and awareness. But none of that can exist until ability appears in the first place. Until someone builds strength of mind, clarity of thought, and disciplined habits, their harmlessness is mostly accidental. It's the result of limited capability rather than a conscious moral choice. That's why developing ability marks the beginning of the journey. The moment someone begins building competence, the distance between weakness and strength starts to shrink. As that gap closes, their decisions begin to carry real meaning. And that is the point where character truly begins to reveal itself. When people hear the word dangerous, they usually picture anger, hostility, or reckless aggression. They imagine someone driven by emotion, someone who loses control and causes destruction without thinking about consequence. But that picture is incomplete, and in many cases, it's simply wrong. The most dangerous people in any environment are rarely the loudest, the most emotional, or the most openly aggressive. Real danger usually begins with competence. It develops quietly through ability, discipline, and understanding. Someone who can think clearly, communicate effectively, and act with precision holds far more influence than someone who only reacts with force. Competence gives a person reach, and reach gives their actions real weight. Think about the difference between someone who talks all the time and someone who speaks carefully with purpose. The first person might create a lot of noise, but the second person can actually move people. Their words carry influence because they're backed by thought, preparation, and confidence. Over time, that influence turns into leverage, and leverage is a form of power many people underestimate. Competence can show up in many different ways. It appears in the disciplined mind that can organize complicated ideas clearly. It appears in the trained body that can endure difficulty and pressure. It appears in the person who communicates well enough to guide others toward action. Each of these abilities might seem ordinary by itself, but when they combine in one person, they begin creating something far more powerful. Influence almost never comes from just one talent. It grows from consistent capability across multiple areas of life. Someone who thinks clearly, but struggles to communicate, won't move people very far. Someone who speaks confidently, but lacks discipline, will eventually lose credibility. Real competence emerges when thinking, speaking, and acting begin to work together. As that alignment develops, the person becomes more effective in the environments around them. Their ideas gain attention because they are explained clearly. Their actions produce results because they're guided by preparation. People start noticing that when this person speaks or acts, things actually happen. That's the moment when competence begins turning into power. Power doesn't always look dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's simply the ability to shift the direction of a conversation. Sometimes it's the ability to organize people around a shared goal. Sometimes it's the quiet authority that comes from producing consistent results over long periods of time. Many people feel uneasy when they encounter this kind of power. They can sense that it carries the potential to influence outcomes beyond ordinary effort. A competent person can shape decisions, redirect effort, and alter the course of events. When that kind of influence appears, people start realizing that ability always carries consequences. Power always includes the possibility of harm. The same competence that allows someone to build something valuable also gives them the capacity to damage what already exists. The disciplined mind that organizes productive work could also organize destructive efforts. The persuasive voice that inspires cooperation could just as easily manipulate confusion if guided by poor character. For that reason, competence itself can make people uncomfortable. Some people prefer environments where no one has much ability because everything feels safer when influence is evenly limited. When someone begins demonstrating clear competence, that balance shifts. Suddenly, one person has the ability to move things forward while others remain where they are. The discomfort that follows isn't always fear. Sometimes it's simply the recognition that responsibility now exists. Once someone becomes capable, they can no longer claim helplessness when outcomes occur. Their ability puts them in a position where their decisions carry visible consequences. That realization forces a higher level of awareness. When a person understands that their words influence people and their actions shape environments, they must start paying closer attention to how they behave. Carelessness becomes more expensive because competence magnifies its effects. This magnification is exactly what makes competence the beginning of danger. Someone with little ability can make mistakes without causing much damage because their reach is small. But a competent person operates with greater influence, meaning their decisions travel further and affect more people. The same pattern appears everywhere. A skilled builder can create structures that last for decades, but those same skills could weaken foundations if used irresponsibly. A disciplined thinker can organize powerful ideas, but that same discipline could also justify harmful decisions if guided by poor judgment. Capability amplifies outcomes. It makes success stronger and failure more destructive. That's why competence eventually has to be paired with wisdom and control. Without those qualities, ability alone becomes unpredictable. Even with those risks, competence is still essential. Without it, people remain stuck in harmless limitation. They can't shape their circumstances. They can't defend what matters to them, and they can't influence the direction of their environment. Their intentions might be positive, but their impact stays small. When competence begins to develop, life starts to shift. Opportunities appear that weren't available before. Responsibility increases because others start recognizing the person's ability. Decisions that once seemed minor suddenly carry greater consequences because more people are affected by them. At that point, the person moves closer to the line that separates harmlessness from danger. Their ability has created leverage, and that leverage means their actions now carry real weight. The distance between weakness and influence begins to close. But competence alone doesn't determine whether that influence becomes constructive or destructive. Ability only creates potential. It opens the door to greater impact, but it doesn't guarantee wise decisions. The next step depends on something far more demanding than skill. The person has to learn how to control the power they've built. Once someone develops competence, a new challenge quietly appears in their life. The challenge isn't about learning more skills or gaining even more influence. Those things may continue naturally with time and effort. The real challenge becomes learning how to control the power that competence has created. Capability by itself isn't automatically good or bad. It's simply potential. A sharp mind, a confident voice, a disciplined body, or an organized approach to solving problems can all be used to build something valuable. But those same abilities can also cause damage if they're driven by impulse instead of judgment. That's why skill is only the beginning of development, not the end of it. History is full of examples of people who had tremendous ability, but lacked the discipline to guide it properly. Their intelligence, strength, or influence placed them in powerful positions, but without restraint, those qualities created chaos. Relationships fell apart, organizations collapsed, and trust disappeared because capability was allowed to operate without control. Strength without discipline is like a powerful engine without steering. The power exists and the movement exists, but the direction becomes unpredictable. A person might move quickly and impressively for a while, but eventually, the lack of control leads to damage. The same abilities that once looked impressive begin causing problems for everyone involved. Discipline is what transforms raw capability into reliable power. It provides the internal structure that allows someone to decide when to act, when to pause, and when to stay silent. Without that structure, ability becomes reactive. With discipline, ability becomes intentional. One of the most important forms of discipline is emotional control. People naturally experience anger, frustration, excitement, and pride. And those emotions can easily influence behavior if they're not managed carefully. When someone possesses real capability, emotional reactions can create consequences that extend far beyond a single moment. Imagine someone with strong communication skills losing their temper during a disagreement. Their words can cut far deeper than those of someone who lacks influence. A careless statement from an articulate person can damage trust that took years to build. Their ability amplifies the emotional reaction, turning a brief moment into a lasting consequence. The same principle applies to action. Someone with physical confidence or organizational authority must learn when not to use it. The urge to prove ability can be strong, especially when others challenge or provoke them. But the strongest demonstration of discipline isn't showing strength. It's knowing when to hold it back. This restraint often confuses people who misunderstand controlled power. They might assume calm behavior means weakness because they don't see the strength behind it. But those who understand discipline see something entirely different. They recognize a person who has the ability to act forcefully, yet chooses not to unless it becomes necessary. That choice requires ongoing awareness. Discipline isn't a single decision someone makes once and then forgets about. It's a daily process of managing thoughts, reactions, and impulses. Every environment presents new situations that test a person's ability to remain calm and deliberate. As capability grows, those tests become more frequent. A person with influence will face disagreements, opportunities for advantage, and moments where they could easily overpower others if they chose to. Each moment becomes a test of discipline. The person must decide whether their actions will be driven by impulse or by principle. Without discipline, power becomes unpredictable. Sometimes it produces impressive results, and other times it creates damage that takes years to repair. People quickly learn to distrust people whose abilities operate without control. No one feels comfortable around someone who possesses strength but lacks restraint. The people who earn the greatest respect are those who demonstrate both ability and control. Others can sense that this person could act decisively if necessary, but they also know that they are guided by careful judgment. Their strength becomes reassuring instead of threatening because it's balanced by discipline. This balance changes how people respond to them. Instead of fearing their capability, others begin trusting it. They know decisions won't be reckless. They understand influence won't be used carelessly. Over time, that trust becomes one of the most powerful forms of authority someone can develop. Discipline also strengthens the person internally. When someone learns to manage their impulses, they gain clarity about their intentions. Their actions become deliberate rather than reactive. They begin understanding that true strength isn't measured by how quickly they can assert power, but by how wisely they choose to use it. That realization marks an important step in closing the gap between weakness and dangerous capability. At first, the journey focuses on building competence and skill. Then it shifts towards something more demanding, mastering the person who now holds that power. A disciplined person understands that every ability carries responsibility. The stronger their influence becomes, the more carefully they must guide it. They can't allow frustration, pride, or impatience to control their behavior. Their discipline becomes the safeguard that protects others from the potential harm their power could create. In that way, discipline becomes the real measure of strength. Many people can develop certain abilities with effort, but far fewer learn to control those abilities with consistent judgment. The difference between the two determines whether capability becomes constructive leadership or uncontrolled disruption. The gap between you and dangerous doesn't close through skill alone. It closes when skill becomes governed by discipline. When strength learns restraint, when influence learns responsibility, and when ability learns patience, a different kind of power begins to appear. It's the kind of power that acts when necessary and remains calm when it isn't. That's the type of strength people respect, trust, and ultimately choose to follow. The moment a person becomes capable, life begins to change around them in quiet ways. Actions that once felt small or unnoticed start carrying greater consequences. Words that once passed by without much attention begin shaping how others think, respond, and behave. Capability increases the reach of a person's presence. And with that larger reach comes a level of responsibility that many people don't recognize right away. Before someone develops real competence, it's easy to believe their choices don't matter very much. Their influence is limited, their voice doesn't carry much weight, and their decisions rarely affect anything beyond their immediate circumstances. During that stage of life, many people feel comfortable assuming their actions mostly affect themselves. They believe their mistakes will stay contained within their own experience. But as ability grows, that belief gradually fades. A capable person begins to notice that their behavior influences far more than just their own results. Their attitude affects the people working beside them. Their decisions start changing the direction of projects, discussions, and plans. Even their example begins to set a tone that others quietly observe and sometimes follow. Responsibility rarely shows up all at once with some obvious announcement. Instead, it appears slowly through the expanding impact of a person's influence. A disciplined worker begins setting a standard that others notice. A thoughtful speaker can redirect the course of a conversation. Someone who consistently keeps their commitments gradually changes what the people around them expect. At first, these changes may seem small, but over time they add up. The more capable someone becomes, the more their behavior shapes the environment they operate in. People begin looking toward them when decisions need to be made. Their opinion begins to matter because their past actions have proven their competence. This shift often surprises people who never expected to carry that kind of influence. They may
I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building
Do 109.